That tastes good. Just like this week's recap. What's going on, everybody? Top 10 Pokemon back, bringing you your favorite weekly Pokemon series, the top Pokemon card auctions of the week. Folks, in this video, we'll be reviewing record prices yet again for a lot of these iconic cards. And I'll also be going over a lot of raw card sales as well. I know a lot of you in the community are not just collectors of graded cards, but raw cards as well. So I'm going to try to incorporate more raw card sales in these weekly auction recaps. Not sure if you noticed, folks, but we are at 30,000 subscribers. Thank you so much. It is such a huge milestone for this channel. I know a lot of YouTubers, that's like nothing for them, but to me, it means the world, so thank you so much. Quick shout out to today's auction recap sponsor. It is the great people over at KantoShark.com. After the recap, head over to KantoShark.com, where they have been selling through a variety of high-end products, including these graded Zards right here, and even this Neo Discovery booster box. And they are always replenishing their inventory with very desirable items made up of sealed vintage booster boxes, as well as all of these items that you see right here and more. I always encourage you to buy from reputable sellers, folks, and Kanto Shark is a reputable seller. So after this recap, head over to KantoShark.com. I will put a link to their website in the description of this video. All right, let's get into this recap, starting off with some very notable sales of illustration rares. Not all illustration rares are super valuable, but these right here have been coming up slowly but surely. Here we have the Ghastly illustration rare from Temporal Forces, sold as a PSA 10 this week for $242, along with this Eevee from Twilight Masquerade that sold for $255, and then from Paradox Rift we have this illustration rare Groudon that sold for an even $300 this week. That might be a new record price as a PSA 10, looking very healthy. Speaking of healthy sales, here is a Magikarp from Paldea Evolved, sold as a PSA 10 this week for $1,300. And then here we have the Giant Anus VMAX as a raw copy, sold for $622, while the PSA 10 copy sold this week for $1,400, and then again for $1,425. Here we have the Alt Art Magikarp and Wailord GX from Team Up, sold as a PSA 10 for $779. And then here we have the Giratina V-Star, sold again this week for a pretty healthy amount of $520 as a PSA 10. And then speaking of Giratinas, here is the Giratina V Alt Art from Lost Origin as a raw copy, sold for about $710, while the PSA 10 copy sold for $1,376, and the Portuguese example sold for $1,375. And then we saw the BGS 10 Black Label Japanese Giratina V sell for 4,750 big ones. On to the madness that is always the Pikachu Vango promo. We saw numerous sales this week, record sales. Here is a raw copy, I guess it's sealed, still sealed in the cellophane, sold for $292. We saw a PSA 9 copy of this card sell for $265. And it wasn't just a few months ago, folks. The PSA 10 copy of this card was selling for less than this. PSA 9. Here's a PSA 10 that sold for an even $600, another PSA 10 that sold for $610, another PSA 10 that sold for $665. Then the highest sale as a PSA 10 sold this week for $740. Unbelievable. Here we have a CGC 10 pristine copy of this card selling for $1,081. But wait, there's more. A BGS 10 pristine copy of this Pikachu sold for $1,350 this week in auction. Like I say week after week, where is the ceiling for these cards? Just seems to be no end, folks. Here we have a raw copy of the Moonbryon VMAX that sold for $1,345. We saw another raw copy sell for $1,403. Another one sell for $1,426. Raw. And then here we saw a PSA 10 copy sell for $2,425. Another sale for $2,750. Another sale for $2,850. And it wasn't that long ago we were knocking on the door of $2,000 for this card as a PSA 10. Wondering when that was going to happen. And that came by like a flash, and now we're on to almost $3,000 for this card as a PSA 10. Here is a raw Rayquaza Vmax from Evolving Skies that sold for $615, while a CGC10 pristine copy of this card sold for $1,150. And then here we saw one sale of the Latios GX alt art from Team Up as a PSA 10 that sold for $1,602. And I never thought I would say this, but when is the Moonbryon in PSA 10 going to surpass this card? I mean, this card has always been the king of alt arts in terms of value, but man, this Moonbryon is just shooting up so fast. It makes me wonder when we're going to get to this price or even higher for that card. A couple of cards from the XY era that I found interesting. Here is a full art Espeon from Breakpoint, sold as a PSA 10 for $200, while this full art Umbreon EX from Fates Collide sold for $460. Here we have a full art Lugia from Ancient Origins that sold as a PSA 10 for $524. And then also from Breakpoint, we saw this secret rare Gyarados full art that sold for $610. On to some vintage cards. Here is a PSA 9 no rarity symbol base set Charizard that sold for $8,988.88. Here is a CGC 10 base 2 Charizard that sold for $1,900. And then here, folks, this is a little bit awesome to me. I don't know, maybe it's just me, but it is a CGC 10 Gem Mint autographed no rarity symbol Japanese base set Gyarados. Whew, that was a mouthful. But take a look at this, folks. This card was signed by the illustrator, Arita. It even has a little drawing of Gyarados by the signature. Both the card and the autograph rated a 10. Sold for $5,850. Now, I'm not a collector of autographed cards, but boy, this is purty, isn't it? I mean, I love Gyarados, so this would probably be like a grail to a lot of people. And I feel like $5,850 is a pretty good deal, if you ask me. Once again, I don't really collect autographed cards, but that seemed pretty awesome. Here we have the first edition Zapdos from Fossil as a PSA 10 that sold for $863. And I get annoyed anymore, folks. Maybe it's just me in my old age. Maybe I'm getting ornery. But when I see things in a title like this, holo error print, that doesn't mean anything. All of these cards in first edition, all of these Zapdos holographic first edition cards had that error holo thing in the corner. Like that, it just goes without saying. It's like saying, this Zapdos is a lightning type variant. Well, no, duh, they all are. I don't know. I'm just being ornery. I'm sorry. I would like to see a first edition Articuno come by as a PSA 10. That would be pretty sweet. But a very low pop card, to say the least. On to the Dark Charizard from Team Rocket, sold as a PSA 10 this week for $3,625. From the E-Series, we saw this reverse holo Umbreon from Skyridge that sold as a PSA 10 for $1,136, along with this CGC 10 regular holo Umbreon from Skyridge that sold for $2,426. Here is the holo Charizard from EX Power Keepers, sold for $1,125. On to some sealed product sales on eBay. Here we have a lot of 550 Crown Zenith booster packs that sold for $3,550. And when you compare these to the cost of the Elite Trainer boxes, this really wasn't a very good deal, as it ended up being like $6.45 per booster pack. And that seems like an awful lot for a lot like this. What do you think? Here we have some graded booster packs from Skyridge. Here is a PSA 10 Polyrath Art Skyridge booster pack that sold for $1,586, while this other one here sold for $1,725, and then the Vaporeon Art sold for $1,811. Here we have a first edition Gym Heroes booster box, sold for $13,600. And then this first edition Portuguese base set booster box sold for $21,100. Just a couple of cards to go over from Fanatics Collect weekly auction block. There wasn't a whole lot this week. A couple of shining cards. Here's a shining Tyranitar in PSA 10 that sold for $1,710. The shining Magikarp sold for $3,360. The shining Charizard sold for $4,200. and the Shining Gyarados sold for $4,680. These were all unlimited Shining cards from Neo Destiny. And then to finish off the auction recap, we stumbled across these beta playtest cards on alt auctions. However, a lot of these were signed beta playtest cards. I believe most of them, if not all, were signed by Takumi Akabane. Here is a CGC10 Pristine Seadra beta playtest card autographed by Akabane and sold for $10,350. Here is an autographed Kangaskhan as a CGC 9.5, sold for $11,028. Here is a CGC10 Chansey, sold for $11,622. Here is a CGC10 Venusaur that sold for $12,600. A CGC9 Venusaur Alpha Playtest card sold for $15,113. Here is another Venusaur as a CGC10. This is the beta presentation card, sold for $22,200. Here is a CGC 9.5 signed Blastoise Alpha Playtest card that sold for $18,226, along with this CGC10 beta playtest Pikachu card that sold for $18,450. Here is a CGC 9.5 beta presentation Blastoise, sold for $22,200, along with this CGC10 beta playtest Blastoise that also sold for $22,200. Here is a CGC10 signed beta playtest Charizard, sold for $37,266, along with this Gem Mint 10 Alpha presentation Charizard that sold for $49,876. And then finally, we stumbled across this CGC 9.5 Alpha playtest Charizard that sold for $54,269 this week. Thank you so much, folks. Don't forget to go check out KantoShark.com. Show them your support, and you'll ultimately be supporting the channel, so I appreciate that. That's all I got today, folks. Thank you for tuning in, and I'll catch you in my next one.